The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Huge controversy has erupted over the weekend after we learned that the owner of a Florida gun store where Orlando anti-gay mass shooter Omar Mateen did not ultimately buy his firearms for his heinous act of terrorism has said he actually Mateen showed up, wanted to buy body armor as well as ammunition. He was turned down by the gun store owner, Robert Abell, who ultimately notified the FBI. And now the big blowup is the FBI acted inappropriately. They didn't act. And I said, well, we have to really think through this and see whether there's a real criticism here of the FBI or not. So as we now understand it, Robert Abell is a co-owner of Lotus Gunworks in Jensen Beach, Florida. And he told ABC News that a man went into his store about 5 or 6 weeks ago and asked some really specific questions about high-end body armor, which of course the store didn't carry. The level body armor that Omar Mateen was asking for is not carried by most gun stores. That's the reality. After he was told by his associates that they don't carry that, the man, now understood to be Omar Mateen, made a phone call in a foreign language, hung up, and then asked about, okay, well, what about buying bulk ammunition? Abell said that a member of his staff thought the questions were odd, made him uncomfortable, so they turned away Omar Mateen. And Abell, thinking that the man was, quote, very suspicious, called the FBI office in West Palm Beach and reported the incident. Now, of course, they didn't have the guy's name. No sale was made. No background check was run. Didn't have the guy's name. The surveillance footage they had was grainy and reportedly not good enough to actually identify Omar Mateen. The FBI, as far as we know, never visited the store or investigated any further. When the news broke of the shooting, Robert Abell said, I am convinced that is the guy who showed up, remembering the individual. So the criticism is, what the hell is going on at the FBI? They get a phone call that this guy's there. He's asking these weird questions, and they don't investigate. That is a normal reaction. But we have to remember, they have no name whatsoever. The surveillance footage was not good enough to identify the individual. And in addition to that, by the time the FBI actually would have followed up, it seems, or by the time of the shooting, the surveillance footage had been overwritten. Most security surveillance systems only keep recordings for 2, 3, 7 days at the most, and they overwrite each other. They don't have unlimited storage. So is the criticism, and there are many criticisms that could be made about the FBI, including sort of lack of inter-office discussion and information sharing. We've talked about that before, many criticisms. I don't know that there is a fair criticism here. The gun store owner certainly did the right thing. Suspicious, I'm going to report it. With no name or surveillance footage, what can you really expect the FBI to do? I don't know. Send a sketch artist, maybe?
Yeah, it depends on, I don't know what kind of, how often these calls are made to the FBI, right?
Fair enough.
But what perhaps might have been the cautious thing to do is say, okay, well, this happened at this store in or near Orlando. Okay, who is it in this area that we are aware of that this might have been? And they have information like that. And on top of that, this guy was already known to the FBI.
Well, that's where you really get into it, which is if you did the analysis Lewis is suggesting, you could say, who in this area have we interviewed that matches this description? Because certainly you could have said, well, he looked somewhere between 25 and 35, for example. And here's a general description. Now, it's possible that wouldn't limit it drastically. It's possible that there are hundreds of individuals that could match that criteria. I don't know. I am not one to haphazardly, in a knee-jerk reaction, defend or criticize agencies, but it really doesn't seem that the FBI could have done much with this information.
Maybe not. Yeah. In this particular instance, I'm not going to criticize them for it. Generally, do I think they're incompetent in the first place to overall?
Absolutely,
Yes,
as you do with everybody.
of
Yeah,
course.
no
No
doubt
doubt.
about that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, let's not be confused. No question. That is Lewis's opinion. Okay, Democratic Senator Charles Schumer of New York said at a press conference after the Orlando mass shooting that most people on the terror watch list were able to buy guns. He said that in 2015, 244 people on the terror watch list tried to buy guns, and of those 244, 223 were able to get guns, only 21 leaving empty-handed. Is that true? If true, that means that 91% of suspected terrorists were able to buy guns when they wanted to, according to the Government Accountability Office. This was fact-checked, and what did it turn up? Well, it's basically true. The only caveat is there were 244 instances of someone suspected for possible terror ties buying guns. So we don't know that it was 244 individual people. If one person tried to buy guns 3 different times, that would count as 3 of the 244. So we can't say it was 223 out of 244 people, but we can say it was 223 out of 244 instances. And that is really a problem, Lewis.
Well, think about it. Of course they can buy guns. If there are ways to buy guns without background checks, then what's the problem?
But it's not even that. It's even with background checks.
Yeah.
The FBI's Terrorist Screening Center has this list of people who are known or reasonably suspected of being involved in terrorist activity.
No one else knows about that list.
It's a secret list of about 700,000 names with U.S. and global agencies. 10,000 names are thought to be American. And the truth is that indeed there is no real mechanism to prevent these individuals from buying the weapons currently. And this is a source of big controversy. Democrats have been trying to change this law with pretty significant resistance from Republicans. And the problem is it is seen by the pro-gun right as a possible infringement on freedom. They say, wait a second, if someone is erroneously on the list, it's a good guy potentially with a gun who is going to not be allowed to buy it. When I hear that, I say, let's improve the mechanism for putting people on the list rather than say, if you're on the list, you can buy guns.
Yeah. And I really don't care if someone is erroneously on the list and they have trouble buying a gun, because there are people that are not there erroneously. And we just have to ensure that they are unable to buy guns. And yeah, if we do a better job at vetting these people and finding out who's who, why not? Let's make it harder.
It's an argument that essentially defends government incompetence, which, by the way, is convenient for many on the right who believe government is completely incompetent at everything and shouldn't be allowed to do anything, which, as we know, is a completely unrealistic libertarian small government fantasy, not based in how things actually work. But that's sort of a different conversation. But don't defend terror watch list suspects getting guns by saying someone might be erroneously on the list, especially since there is also a mechanism for challenging that status and getting off the list. It can be done. And if you're delayed by a couple of weeks in getting a gun, it's no big Second Amendment violation. Donald Trump has been the presumptive Republican nominee for weeks now. He clinched the required 1,237 delegates some time ago. And some elected Republicans are either living in a fantasy world or know something we don't, because some are saying that Donald Trump's nomination is still uncertain. I have video of Wisconsin Republican Senator Ron Johnson, who is admittedly not a fan of Donald Trump, who said over the weekend that it is reasonably uncertain that Donald Trump will be the Republican nominee. Here's him on CNN. What is he talking about exactly?
According to a paper from your home state, you said just before an event last month, I'm going to certainly endorse the Republican nominee, and obviously it looks like that will be Mr. Trump. Have you endorsed him?
It's been my intention to support the Republican nominee, and again, nobody can predict the outcome of this thing. So I think things remain reasonably uncertain. But
so
it's
are you
my
endorsing
intention
Mr. Trump right now?
Support. I intend to support the Republican nominee and certainly support the areas of agreement: growing our economy, defeating ISIS, strengthening our military, securing our border. I mean, no two people agree 100% on everything. So I'll support the areas of agreement.
No one can predict the outcome. Things remain reasonably uncertain. I wish Dana Bash had followed up on that, right? And said, well, hold on. Specifically, in what way is the outcome uncertain? Because he has clinched the 1,237. Of course, that hasn't officially been voted on at the Republican National Convention. But there is no realistic path in sight for booting Trump unless there's some kind of strong arm action by Republican insiders at the convention. This is the time, Lewis, to go to a follow-up instead of just moving on to the next scripted question, and we didn't get that, unfortunately.
Yes, well, corporate media at its best. Does he know something we don't know? Are there going to be serious shenanigans at the convention?
That's what I'm wondering. And there's speculation that this could just be Ron Johnson's sort of political posturing, because he's in this very complex reelection campaign in Wisconsin. Former Wisconsin Senator Russ Feingold is running against him. The latest poll has Russ Feingold up by 9 over Ron Johnson. And think back to the Republican primary results in Wisconsin. Ted Cruz defeated Donald Trump in that primary, 48-35. Maybe Ron Johnson doesn't really think anything is uncertain about Trump, but he wants to somehow placate the reality that Trump didn't do that well in the Wisconsin Republican primary, thinking it'll help him defeat Russ Feingold. I don't know. But if we take him at his word, what scenarios exist? Something explodes at the convention, right? Political suicide for the Republican Party, I believe, if they strong-arm remove Donald Trump. Or what, a third-party candidate surfaces? We've talked about that. At this point, it would be very difficult for even a strong third-party right-wing candidate to do anything but help Hillary Clinton win.
Yeah. If you do listen to his language very carefully, it does seem like it's more likely political posturing. He's saying, oh, well, here are the issues I agree with. And he lists off some red meat there, like strengthening the military.
Yeah, not banning Muslims. That notably missing from his areas of agreement with Donald Trump. Send me your thoughts. What is Ron Johnson thinking about here? I'm on Twitter at dpacman. Lewis is on Twitter at Lewis Motamedi.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
I want to mention something that doesn't really ever get attention on the show, which is that we're funded by the audience. There's this thing called membership, and it's very hard to ever really hear about it because I don't mention it at all. But we do depend on memberships to keep the show going. And today's new member of the day is Grisel Gallardo, who signed up at davidpakman.com/membership. And Grisel gets the world famous bonus show hosted by producer Lewis, as well as commercial-free audio and video feeds of the show, invitations to our members-only town hall video conferences with Lewis and with me. And it's just the way, right, Lewis? I mean, if we are thinking about the future of media, supporting programs that craft a different narrative to homogenous corporate media regurgitations, you should support those, right? You should support those if you believe them to be valuable. And hopefully most of our audience does.
Corporate media vomit. Let's just call it what it really is.
Regurgitation may be too classy a word in this case.
Yep.
Thank you to Grisel. Sign up at davidpakman.com/membership. If you ever shop on Amazon.com, there is a way that the shopping you do can support us. Before going to Amazon, you go to davidpakman.com/Amazon. All that does is redirect you to Amazon, but it gives us a 7% kickback from anything you buy. A lot of people, Lewis, now that it's in season, buying all sorts of home gardening supplies through our Amazon link. I've mentioned this before. I really want to get involved in gardening, and we heard last week from Craig Wilcox about how gardening seems to be one of the great health maintainers in Okinawan society, lower body strength and blah, 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 blah. Just seems to be a really good thing. I thought about trying to get like an herb garden going on my balcony, but the balcony above me basically is shading the entire balcony. I just don't know how to get this thing going, but I would love to be doing some gardening.
Same here, and not just a small one. I would like to be producing quite a bit of food.
Is that right?
I would, yeah. Yeah. It's I can't do that right now because I don't even have a balcony.
Right.
I'm in the middle of a concrete mess, you know?
Right. Yeah. So anyway, I'm jealous of everybody in our audience who's buying all sorts of gardening supplies. I really would like to get that going. Also, I saw a bunch of people buy these undershirts that I've tried before. I have such a problem with undershirts where I try to get V-necks, to go underneath button-down shirts. And I have one of two issues. No matter what size I buy, either the V-neck is so tight that you can see it like way up above my shirt that I'm wearing, or it's as long as a dress, like it goes down halfway to my knees. Whatever happened to reasonable undershirts these days?
Well, might I recommend...
don't say it.
What?
Are you about to recommend an A shirt known by also a very, very offensive term to some?
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, they're great. Yep.
I don't think I can do it.
I normally wear a large T-shirt, but with these I can buy a medium.
Right.
And it's perfect.
Yeah, I just don't know that I can do. I'm not going to call it by the other. An A shirt, I think, is the proper name, right?
It's a sleeveless shirt. It's a sleeveless undershirt.
Yeah, sometimes associated with domestic violence. Is that? I mean, am I being clear enough as to what we're talking about?
That is the nomenclature, if you will, the common nomenclature.
Anyway, congratulations to people who have figured out the whole undershirt thing. And remember, if you ever shop on Amazon, davidpakman.com/Amazon. Okay, remember the Jim Bakker show? I am about to play for you evidence of total mental illness and delusion. This is really not for children. If I had a kid, I would not want them to see what I'm about to play for you, so I'm giving you fair warning. Get the kids out of the room. I do not recommend children seeing this. Janet Jackson's breast, not going to damage children's lives. What I'm about to play for you has a really good chance of doing that. The Jim Bakker program is the one that has stated recently that Muslims have taken over America, that someone is going to die because of gay marriage, that there is mathematical proof that we are in the end times, that an EMP attack is coming as God's punishment, so that you should buy horses, and also that cannibalism is coming to America, so you should buy prepper food. This has become a parody of itself. It is the Jim Bakker show. This is no different than if Saturday Night Live were to parody this program. The parody would be indistinguishable from the actual show. Here is the clip, and what we are being told here is that God has spoken about Donald Trump. Spoke to apparently the guest host on this show. How lucky she is. Take a listen.
Now, to set up this, I want the church to hear me.
Please.
I know that you all look for people who are going to lead this nation to be somebody, ideally, who believes in the Bible, knows the Bible, but I'm going to tell you something. You have to line up with what God wants.
Yeah.
This is not about what we want.
That's right.
This is about what God wants. Now, God sees people.
Yes.
He sees the heart of people.
Preach.
We look on the outward appearance, but God sees their heart.
That's
Church.
right.
And He knows there's something in them that is for a purpose that He has brought about.
Now, you met him first, and he gave you this prophecy.
Yeah.
I knew immediately it was the word of God.
You were one of the first ones to get this prophecy privately.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't on TV or anything. And you heard this, and this was before Trump declared for running for president.
That's correct.
Is that right?
It was in May of last year. Ted Cruz had announced he was running for president, and my initial reaction with Ted, of course, like a lot of the evangelicals, was, yay, Ted, finally a conservative and a voice. But the minute I read the prophecy, I recognized the voice of God. And I stepped back and I said, but God.
Right.
Father, what are you saying?
Okay, pause it right there. She knew right away this was God speaking to her and not, some guy on the CB radio frequency that she monitors every morning along with the police scanner and bizarre online radio shows. She knew right away this was God speaking to her. No confusion whatsoever. We're going to continue. For people who are watching, take a look at all the foods. This is like they sell prepper food on the show. Look at all the foods that are on the counter. I counted red Supreme food, green Supreme food, coconut oil, chia seeds, special water bottles, and eyedroppers full of some kind of liquid. Who knows what it is? This is all the while they're explaining to you how God speaks to them. God speaks to the people who sell bulk prepper food.
And I'm telling you,
And I want people to hear Mark, and they don't have to believe.
No.
Listen. I have told God that I'm going to put the unknown prophets on this broadcast.
That's true. And
the people can discern.
That's
it's about
right.
time you all pray for discernment.
Yes.
Because who you vote for and who you don't vote for or what you're doing. It's life and death right now in this country.
Amen.
And I know that one of the things the church is grieved about is that Donald Trump calls people names. They don't like that. The church gets embarrassed by it. But can I tell you something? Jesus called people names.
You vipers.
He called Herod a fox. He called the religious people whitewashed tombs and vipers and snakes.
Yeah.
That's
Jesus.
That's really dirty to be called a tomb.
My Jesus.
There's also a guy sitting next to, can you put up just the screenshot of the very end of that, just for people who are watching? I don't know how they put together these panels. The guy sitting next to the woman who spoke to God about Trump, it looks like a doctor. He's wearing sort of like medical scrubs, and the guy appears to have the most bizarre facelift maybe I've ever seen on anyone before. How do you assemble this panel? This is diagnostic mental illness of the most serious kind.
Well, I don't know if it's mental illness at all.
You think it's a sham?
I think what you have here are just people trying to make a lot of money off of.
So you believe this is a concoct? This is not mentally ill people. This is snake oil salesmen who know exactly what they're doing. To quote Marco Rubio.
I'm pretty sure about that. Yes, and the product placement is part of that whole thing for me.
The one thing I didn't mention is there's a point at where if you look on the floor next to one of the people on the panel, there seems to be one of those bulk buckets of oats that they also sell. I mean, the stage is riddled with these food products that they sell. They're talking about how God has spoken to them. And you know what? They know how to speak to evangelicals because the woman said it. You tell them what it is God wants. You might think it makes sense to support Cruz, but God wants you to support Trump. And that's actually something that resonates with a lot of individuals who buy into this evangelical type right-wing Christianity, which is, I need to discern, as the word was used there, what it is that God wants, and that's what I need to support.
Mm-hmm. And apparently you can discern that by listening to people selling you products.
Yeah.
But, the people who follow Jim Bakker and people like this, you could say they have their head in the sand. They've got their head in the oats. Right?
Yes, yeah. Quite literally. They have their head stuck in one of those 5-gallon drums of oats. Very, very disturbing. It's unclear that this doesn't violate some kind of so this is basically like a legitimized scam that these people are running, and people just absolutely love it. I have a story for you that is so insane that I would completely understand if you didn't believe it. I'm not talking about Trump being the Republican nominee. But this story is all too real. Thomson Reuters is all over it in their daily dispatch on underreported news. In Kenya, or Kenya, as some like to say, 2 men have been accused of gay sex. Now you might say, well, David, wait. It's already not making any sense. What do you mean they've been accused of having gay sex? That's right. In Kenya, the state punishes same-sex sexual acts as crimes. So let's get past that and continue. How does Kenya determine or test for whether someone has had gay sex? Mandatory anal examinations. What else, Lewis? Obviously. The 2 unnamed men, who, by the way, deny having had gay sex, said in a petition to the court that they were coerced into undergoing anal exams by security personnel and a public hospital in Mombasa in February of 2015. They actually filed a motion against the mandatory exams saying, wait a second, these are degrading treatment. These violate every reasonable human rights convention. And High Court Judge Matthew Amukule said on Thursday that there is sufficient justification under Kenyan law to allow the mandatory intrusion into the human body for the purpose of gathering evidence to prove a sexually related crime, saying, quote, the petition has no merit and it is dismissed. Now, not surprisingly, Amnesty International's regional director said the court ruling is unacceptable and also absurd, since governments have no business proving whether or not consensual sexual activity has taken place. Human Rights Watch has said the examinations amount to torture under international law. And meanwhile, even though the accused's case against the anal exams has been dismissed, there's still the primary case against the men for allegedly having gay sex. That continues, Lewis. What a world we are living in at this point.
Yeah. Fascinating how things change and the times change. I mean, there was a time when this type of sexual intercourse was so common. Men might have even been considered weak if you went around having sex with women all the time, and instead men were having sex with each other because that was the more manly thing to do.
Right.
Incredible what has transpired since those times.
And think that even here in the U.S., where gay sex isn't a crime, but you can still be fired for being gay in many states. Religion can be used as a basis for discriminating against LGBT individuals in some cases, etc. We still have huge homophobia. We still have gay bashing. We just had a horrific LGBT sexual orientation motivated mass shooting in Orlando, Florida. That's here in the U.S. Imagine what it's like being in Kenya, where the state can punish people for having gay sex, which they determine the validity of by mandatory anal exams. It's unconscionable.
Yeah. Hey, Kenya, there are plenty of other countries, many of which are in the Middle East.
Send us your thoughts about what's going on. Facebook.com/David Pakman Show. We are on Facebook. We're on Twitter. We're on Reddit. We're all over the place. Send me your thoughts about this and any other stories we talked about today.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm joined today by John White, who's the author of What Happened to the Republican Party and What It Means for American Politics. John, as I'm sure you know, many have been discussing the sort of impact or significance of Donald Trump as the presumptive Republican nominee on the party. Is it going to lead to a split within the Republican Party? Does this signify some turning point in the Republican Party? But you actually make the case that this sort of rift in the Republican Party dates back even beyond the failed candidacy of Mitt Romney, but really even to George W. Bush's presidency. So set it all up for us to sort of get us into this discussion.
Sure. Well, first, thank you for having me, David. This problem that the Republican Party has in some ways goes all the way back to Ronald Reagan, very ironically. Reagan was a bomb to the Republican Party, a gift to the Republican Party. And Reagan really brought the Republican Party to parity with the Democrats and to near majority status. The revolution that he set in place, culminating in 1994 with the Republican takeover in the House. One problem, however, is that the Republicans held on to Ronald Reagan too long. I call him St. Ronald. He is now an historical figure for our millennials. They've never lived a day that Ronald Reagan was president. And he's been deceased for a fair chunk of their young lives already. That's one problem. The second problem is George W. Bush, because, look, Americans view George W. Bush as a failed president. And nothing helps a party like a successful president, a la Ronald Reagan. So that was always going to be a problem for the party. How do they come to grips with George W. Bush? How do they deal with the failures of his presidency? And in dealing with that, that's created this split. You have the Tea Party that says, look, Bush was a big government Republican. He spent too much. He engaged in failed wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. In the end, the country was not better off under his presidency. It was worse off. The third thing that's ongoing, of course, is a demographic revolution. And very simply, when Reagan was elected president, you had 89% of the electorate that was white. Today, in 2012, that was 72%. In 2016, that will go down to about 70%, maybe 69%. Mitt Romney carried whites by the same large majority that Ronald Reagan did in 1980 and 1984. Reagan won, Romney lost. So you have all these problems that were converging on the Republican Party before Donald Trump ever became a candidate. Today, their problems are far worse because the split within the party has been aggravated by Trump. Their demographic problems have been aggravated by Donald Trump. And what we're now facing is not just an historic loss for a presidential candidate, maybe rivaling Barry Goldwater, but we're now facing a Republican brand that is so tarnished, it's going to take years to rehabilitate.
Before we get into the sort of specifics and dynamics of what's going on with Donald Trump, I'd love to address the sort of ideological shift that has taken place in the country and how that relates to the future of the Republican Party. I mean, we've talked about public perception on a lot of social issues. Abortion now, a majority of Americans believe it should be legal in most cases for the first time since Roe v. Wade, according to, I believe it's the Gallup tracking poll. On gay marriage, we've seen a significant liberalization or move to the left on that issue. On many, many issues, we've seen broadly the U.S. electorate move left, but the Republican Party is still raising disproportionate amounts of money from the more extreme elements within it. So how is that going to affect the party?
Well, David, the culture wars are over. Let's start with that. What Reagan did was basically to merge together evangelicals and high socioeconomic status, business-minded, entrepreneur-type Republicans who were never really interested in the culture wars, but did want less government. That coalition is now basically in tatters. You're right. I mean, on abortion, it's the majority position is now the Bill Clinton position, which is safe, legal, and rare. On gay marriage, this whole question of gay rights has moved with such alacrity. I think it surprised a lot of people, myself included. We always saw that movement going in the direction of gay marriage and general acceptance, but now that has moved with such a degree of force, and particularly among millennials, so that the Republican position, when it comes to gay marriage and so forth, particularly among millennials, is just another disaster for them. I mean, they have got to accept that the culture wars are over. Best thing that happened to the Republican Party was the Supreme Court decision legalizing gay marriage, because now they can say, look, this is the law of the land. It's a settled issue. You know, we may not like it, but we need to move on.
And they sort of have, right? But to something that is of questionable value, which is moving on to, well, number one, this recent focus on transgender bathroom laws, but also arguing along the lines of so-called religious freedom, the Hobby Lobby case, the freedom not to cover contraception as part of insurance. And that was sort of predictable, but I don't know if you think that it's going to be effective electorally in any way.
No, I don't think it's effective. And I think that the effective thing to do is simply to say these are now matters of settled opinion and settled law. And we have a whole bunch of other important issues that we want to talk about to the American electorate more broadly. And they basically, they haven't done the hard work of thinking, what does conservatism mean in the 21st century? You know, I mean, look, Reagan never went back to the election of 1944 and said, well, we got to be governed by what the party did in 1944. Republicans going back to Reagan's election in 1980 today is the equivalent of doing the same thing. It's just insane.
Let's talk about Donald Trump a little bit. I mean, there's so much to discuss. Number one, there's just sort of the internal dynamics of Trump positions that on many issues don't in any way reflect what seems to be mainstream Republican opinion. This includes everything from, to some degree, taxation, intervention in terms of Middle East dictators. You know, the list goes on, praising Planned Parenthood as doing great things for millions and millions of women. But in spite of that, we've seen many elements of the Republican primary voters embrace Donald Trump. And now we're actually seeing establishment Republicans, everybody from, you know, Ron Johnson and Senator Kirk and so many others, Mitt Romney, saying this is a bad idea. This is not a good direction. So first of all, how do you think that the broader Republican opinion of Trump will impact the election? And then more generally speaking, I mean, what do you see as happening here in the lead up to the November election?
Well, first, voters are driven by issues but they're also driven by raw emotion. Okay, and that involves questions about values. It's the emotion that has really driven the Republican primary electorate led by Barack Obama. Because the Republican primary electorate basically has taken the position that Barack Obama, as president, has succeeded, but succeeded in entirely the wrong way from their view. First, Obamacare is the law of the land, upheld by the Supreme Court twice. Second, there's a significant number of Republicans who believe that Barack Obama is a Muslim, and that he's gotten away with it, that he's anti-American, that he wasn't born in the United States. And of course, Trump led that charge. So the animosity that the president has toward Donald Trump is both real and personal. And that has tapped into this emotion that Republican voters have that their party has failed them. It has failed to stand up to Obama. It's failed to challenge Obama. In some ways, these voters have not, they say they're for the Constitution, but they've never read it in terms of the separation of powers and the fact that control over the Congress doesn't mean that you get what you want with a sitting president there. So all of these things have come together in a way that ironically has allowed Barack Obama to say, not that he said it, but Barack Obama has broken the Republican Party, in part because he's driven their base simply completely off the edge. And the Republican establishment, I think after 2012, first they said, look, we've got to deal with immigration. We've got to get this off the table. We know what happened. The reform failed and so on. That was, by the way, the right strategy. But then their focus really was on process. It was about data gathering and technology, which the establishment said Obama did a great job on that, and Romney didn't. It was about moving up their convention to July as opposed to late August. It was all process driven when really it's not idea driven. You know, again, what does conservatism stand for in the 21st century? How do you rethink those arguments? And that's important, and it's needed actually, because conservatism is still a needed, necessary element in American politics. And a viable minority party is essential to the health of our democracy. And right now we don't have either.
Well, it is absolutely fascinating. Again, we've been speaking with John White. He's the author of What Happened to the Republican Party and What It Means for American Politics. We'll be watching it as you will. Thanks so much for talking to us about it.
Thanks so much, David.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
87% of Venezuelans say they don't have enough money for food. Now, the context of this is that Venezuela is seen by many progressives as a sort of bastion and haven of successful progressivism. Hugo Chavez previously and now Nicolas Maduro are seen as big progressive leaders by many on the American left. When Hugo Chavez died, we were what I believe is more realistic about his legacy, strong-arm authoritarianism under the sort of guise of progressivism because of his rhetoric about the poor, when in reality there's no media freedom in Venezuela, there is no judicial freedom or independence, there is rampant corruption, et cetera, et cetera. Some people were really angry with me when I made that analysis. One person I actually remember angrily canceled their membership, saying we are failing to recognize how Venezuela under Chavez and eventually under Nicolas Maduro are sort of progressive utopias. People have what they need, people have food, people have toilet paper, even though all the evidence tells us that is actually not true. We're going to go into this further tomorrow. We're releasing a longer form piece about what I call authoritarian leftism, which I think you'll find interesting. But I saw this story over the weekend, and it serves us as a good sort of precursor before tomorrow's story. The New York Times has a report out about Venezuela, as they say, convulsing from hunger. This is a country with some of the largest oil reserves in the world. It's impossible for people not to riot because they need food. And the picture we're displaying here is actually from a food riot. In the last 2 weeks alone, there have been more than 50 food riots, protests, and mass looting in Venezuela. Countless businesses have been stripped or destroyed after all of their supplies were stolen. 5 people have been killed. And as I mentioned before, 87% of Venezuelans say they do not have money to buy enough food. This is the most recent assessment of living standards by the Simón Bolívar University. About 72% of monthly wages are being spent to buy food, according to the Center for Documentation and Social Analysis. Nicolas Maduro has tightened his grip over the food supply. He has used emergency decrees that he signed this year to put food distribution in the hands of a very small group of citizens' brigades that are loyal to putative leftists. This, Lewis, is not a temporary shortage. It has been a systematic destruction of the economy by the country, and people are leaving the country in significant numbers. And it's very frustrating to me because as progressives, we should be able to say, hey, here are progressive ideas, and here are some examples of when they're carried out productively, positively. And here's examples of where we're really just seeing progressive sounding rhetoric and actually have strong arm authoritarianism and tons of corruption. The Cristina Kirchner administration in Argentina, which recently ended, is one that was putatively, rhetorically progressive and populist, and in reality was rife with corruption and varying forms of authoritarianism. I don't believe progressives are losing anything if we say, hey, you know what? We actually shouldn't be cheerleading regimes like that in Venezuela. This is more evidence of what's going on there. And sadly, too many progressives are married to the idea the left-wing rhetoric of Venezuela is great, so everything is great in Venezuela.
Yeah. Well, if you were suffering financially and the Maduro administration helped you out in certain ways, ultimately their policies and their rule has led to this. And now everyone is suffering. I feel terrible. But,
I do too.
It's they should. At this point, you really should leave the country if you can.
There are sort of shadows of the Soviet Union collapse in Venezuela. I'm not saying the situation is analogous. I'm not saying the same thing is going to happen. But you had situations in the now defunct Soviet Union where people didn't receive salaries for periods of time. And the theory was, well, you're living in metropolitan areas and you might have some land outside of cities and you can sort of gather the food and the basic supplies you need. And the reality is that is not the case. Again, 87% of Venezuelans saying they don't have enough money for food. Widespread toilet paper shortages have been reported for years. And we're going to touch on this more tomorrow in our piece about authoritarian supposed leftism. And I think if nothing else, it will be a fascinating piece that maybe not everybody will agree with, but that's okay. That's the type of discussion that's important for us to have. After real questions came up about whether Donald Trump really makes all of those donations to veterans that he claims to make, he started shelling out money to veterans with funds from his nonprofit called the Trump Foundation. And it was, totally coincidentally timed often to be right before people were set to cast their votes in particular state primaries. The problem now, and this seems to have backfired on Trump, is that the IRS and the FEC say that Trump is actually going against rules about foundation and campaign overlap. This is a tax-exempt foundation, and therefore it can't be involved with Donald Trump's political activities. Early primary states saw Donald Trump giving these foundation checks to charities at his political rallies. So even if the Trump Foundation is not his campaign organization, there is no way, Lewis, to say that it is not political activity. When you present these checks at political rallies, those donations are very clearly political. It is very hard to deny that.
That is a very clear connection. Yeah. I mean, can you say it's separate because of where the money goes? I mean, it's still
they're being used for political gain. And
Yeah.
I think that that is absolutely impossible to deny.
Right.
And the question is, why are these claims not being more tightly examined? There are private dealings with legal questions. Why wouldn't we be concerned that this type of stuff would continue if Donald Trump were to be president of the United States? This seems like sloppy accounting, sloppy disregard for the rules. And if Donald Trump is doing this as a private citizen, so to speak, we have to be wondering what it is that he would do as president. And of course, this is only one of myriad concerns about Donald Trump. But the sort of irony here is all of the allegations Trump makes against Hillary Clinton seem to also apply to Trump. Trump obsessed with allegations about the Clinton Foundation, Clinton cash, etc. Seems that the Trump Foundation also has very, very questionable activities, which may violate not only IRS, but FEC violations. How are these different? I guess the difference is Hillary Clinton is a Democrat and Donald Trump is at least now running as a Republican. I don't get it.
Yep. Well, I'm not sure either. I mean, the Clinton stuff, they had a pretty good reputation around that for quite some time.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't surprise me at all if there was all sorts of corruption and nasty things happening in both.
The number of very bizarre circumstances involving Trump and his donations to veterans are truly, truly disturbing. Questions about whether he even was donating the stuff he said he was donating. And then in a sort of effort to very quickly get some donations on the record, making the donations, but in a way that appears to violate both IRS and FEC rules. Very, very bizarre. And of course, sadly, the Trump supporters could not care less about this. That is truly, truly disturbing. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here's a voicemail I received. Take a listen.
Hey, David, I just wanted to float this idea out there. So a while ago, there was someone who worked for Trump who said that he was posed to do irreparable damage because he didn't think his campaign was going to actually go this far, and now he really doesn't want to win. And he didn't think, he would actually be in this position to be the nominee and potentially be the president.
Right.
So I was just talking to some people, and I was thinking, what could happen is he's kind of in a position right now where he could potentially choose the next president of the United States. If he chooses his vice president, and then the day he gets in office, he just resigns. Like, he could do that, and that would...
I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, that's if he wins, right? Donald Trump can choose the next president with this get elected and then resign thing, but he has to get elected first.
Yeah, but he has a chance.
Yeah, he has a chance.
He can certainly beat Hillary, and that's assuming he even becomes the nominee if something crazy happens at the convention. And yeah, I don't know.
Interesting idea. On the bonus show today, we will talk about the Ramadan alcohol punishment continuing. We will talk about the 50 best restaurants in the world. The new list has been released, and also an update to our story about short grain white rice. Was the initial report overblown? Yes, it was. Or was it? Yes, it was. We will talk about that on the bonus show. DavidPakman.com/membership. That is the one and only place to sign up.
The David Pakman Show at DavidPakman.com.